In the grand tapestry of human history, there are very few individuals who have managed to fundamentally alter the moral fabric of the world. Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela was one of those rare souls. To understand the magnitude of his journey, one must look beyond the international icon and the Nobel laureate and peer into the deeply complex, often perilous world in which he lived, fought, and triumphed. He was a man who spent 27 years in the dark belly of a prison cell, only to emerge not with a burning desire for vengeance, but with an open hand of reconciliation that saved an entire nation from self-destruction. His story began on July 18, 1918, in the tiny, remote village of Mvezo, situated along the banks of the Mbashe River in the Eastern Cape of South Africa. Born into the Madiba clan of the Tembu people, his father, Godla Henry Mfakanyiswa, was a respected local chief and a principal counselor to the royal house of the Tembu tribe. It was his father who gave him the name Rolihlahla, a Xhosa word that literally translates to pulling the branch of a tree, or more colloquially, a troublemaker. It was an astonishingly prophetic name for a boy who would grow up to shake the very foundations of British colonialism and the brutal system of apartheid. When young Rolihlahla was still a mere child, his father lost his wealth and chieftainship after a dispute with a local colonial magistrate. This forced the family to move to the nearby village of Qunu, a place of open pastures and rolling green hills where Mandela spent his happiest early years, herding cattle and playing with other boys in the fields. It was in Qunu that he attended a small Methodist mission school, becoming the first member of his family to receive a formal Western education. On his very first day of school, according to a long-standing colonial custom, where African children were given English names, his teacher bestowed upon him the name Nelson. From that day forward, he would navigate two worlds: the traditional tribal world of his ancestors and the structured, segregated world of colonial South Africa. When Nelson was only 9 years old, his father passed away from a severe lung disease. This tragedy altered the course of his life forever. He was adopted by the paramount chief of the Tembu people, Chief Jongintaba Dalindyebo, who raised him alongside his own children at the royal residence of Great Place in Mukekizweni. Here, in the heart of tribal politics, young Nelson witnessed the traditional system of leadership. He spent countless hours sitting quietly in the corner of the royal court, watching how the regent chief conducted community meetings. He noticed that the chief never forced his opinion on the elders. Instead, he allowed everyone to speak, listening intently to their grievances, their wisdom, and their anger, before summarizing the consensus at the very end. Mandela would later compare this style of leadership to a shepherd who stays behind his flock, letting the nimblest go out ahead, whereupon the others follow, not realizing that all along they are being directed from behind. This profound lesson in patience, democracy, and consensus became the bedrock of his political strategy decades later. As he entered his late teens and early 20s, Mandela pursued higher education at the University College of Fort Hare, which was at the time the only institution of higher learning for Black students in South Africa. It was here that he first tasted political activism, participating in a student representative council boycott against the poor quality of food and the lack of student power. This act of defiance resulted in his suspension from the university. Shortly after returning home to the royal palace, he discovered that Chief Jongintaba had arranged marriages for him and his foster brother. Feeling trapped and eager to chart his own destiny, Mandela made a daring decision. In 1941, under the cover of darkness, he fled the royal court and traveled to the bustling, volatile city of Johannesburg. Johannesburg was a massive, industrialized metropolis built on gold mines, and it served as a brutal awakening for the young Mandela. For the first time, he experienced the full weight of racial oppression on a daily basis. He saw millions of Black South Africans packed into squalid, overcrowded townships, denied basic human rights, and forced to carry internal passports known as passbooks. Without these books, a black person could be instantly arrested and thrown into prison. He witnessed a wealthy white minority enjoying unprecedented luxury, while the black majority who built the city lived in deep poverty and fear. Determined to use his intellect as a weapon, Mandela secured a job as a law clerk and enrolled at the University of the Witwatersrand to study law, where he was the only black student in his faculty. It was during this period that he met Walter Sisulu, a charismatic real estate agent and political activist who would become his lifelong mentor and closest confidant. Sisulu introduced Mandela to the African National Congress, a political organization dedicated to fighting for the rights of black South Africans. Along with other brilliant young minds like Oliver Tambo and Anton Lembede, Mandela felt that the older generation of ANC leaders was too passive and polite in their appeals to the white government. They believed that writing letters and signing petitions would never bring about freedom. In 1944, Mandela and his friends formed the ANC Youth League, injecting a new wave of radicalism and energy into the liberation movement. Their goal was to transform the ANC into a mass movement driven by ordinary people. The urgency of their struggle became absolute in 1948, when the hardline National Party won the all-white elections and officially instituted the state policy of apartheid. Apartheid, a word meaning apartness in the Afrikaans language, was a meticulous, legally codified system of racial segregation. It divided the population into strict racial categories, prohibited mixed marriages, segregated public spaces, and completely stripped non-white citizens of their political representation and land ownership. In response to this tyranny, Mandela rose through the ranks of the ANC, becoming the National Volunteer-in-Chief for the Defiance Campaign of 1952. He traveled across the country, organizing large-scale civil disobedience, encouraging people to deliberately break unjust apartheid laws by entering white-only areas, using white-only trains, and burning their hated passbooks. Over 8,000 people were arrested, and Mandela himself was convicted of statutory communism, receiving a suspended prison sentence and a government ban that restricted his movements and prevented him from attending political gatherings. Despite these restrictions, Mandela continued his work in secret. In 1953, alongside Oliver Tambo, he established Mandela and Tambo, the very first black-owned law firm in South Africa. Day after day, crowded lines of poor, desperate clients filled their waiting room. They defended ordinary people who had been beaten by police, arrested under apartheid laws, or evicted from their ancestral homes. Mandela used his sharp legal mind and commanding presence in the courtroom to challenge the state. But he quickly realized that the law itself was a tool of the oppressor, and the courtroom walls were shrinking around them. The state's patience with Mandela ran out in December 1956, when he and 155 other activists were arrested and charged with high treason against the state. The exhausting treason trial dragged on for more than 4 long years, placing a massive strain on Mandela's personal life and his legal practice. Ultimately, the state failed to prove its case, and all the accused were acquitted in March 1961. But the celebration was short-lived, as the political landscape of South Africa had already changed dramatically and violently. On March 21, 1960, a watershed moment occurred in the township of Sharpeville. A peaceful crowd of black demonstrators gathered outside a local police station to protest the pass laws. Panicked and heavily armed, the apartheid police opened fire on the unarmed crowd. They fired into the backs of people as they turned to run for their lives. 69 people were killed, including women and children, and more than 180 were wounded. The Sharpeville massacre shocked the global community, leading the South African government to declare a state of emergency, ban the ANC, and arrest thousands of activists. For Mandela, Sharpeville was the final proof that peaceful resistance had reached a dead end. For decades, they had preached nonviolence, only to be met with military force and bloodshed. He argued that it was wrong and immoral to continue preaching peace to a population facing an armed, ruthless adversary. In 1961, Mandela helped co-found Umkhonto we Sizwe, which means the Spear of the Nation, the armed wing of the ANC. He became its first commander-in-chief, orchestrating a campaign of sabotage against government infrastructure, electricity pylons, and military installations, while taking strict precautions to avoid taking human lives. Mandela went completely underground, adopting various disguises, including dressing as a chauffeur and a chef, to evade the police. The newspapers dubbed him the Black Pimpernel because of his legendary ability to slip through the fingers of the security forces. He slipped out of the country secretly to travel across Africa and Europe, seeking financial support, political backing, and military training for his freedom fighters. However, his underground life came to an abrupt end on August 5, 1962, when police intercepted his car outside the city of Howick. Mandela was captured, convicted of incitement and leaving the country without a passport, and sentenced to 5 years in prison. But while serving this sentence, the police raided an ANC underground hideout in Rivonia, discovering documents that linked Mandela and his comrades to a full-scale armed revolution. This discovery led to the famous Rivonia trial of 1963 and 1964. Mandela and 9 other leaders faced charges of sabotage and conspiracy to overthrow the government, crimes that carried the death penalty by hanging. Recognizing that they were likely to die, Mandela and his comrades decided not to offer a legal defense, but to use the trial as a political platform to condemn the apartheid state before the eyes of the world. On April 20, 1964, Mandela stood from the dock and delivered an eloquent, powerful speech that lasted for over 3 hours. He detailed the suffering, the poverty, and the broken dignity of the Black population. He concluded his defense with a statement that would reverberate through the halls of history. He said, "I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against Black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." The international pressure generated by the trial saved them from the gallows. Instead, the judge sentenced Mandela and his co-accused to life imprisonment. He was taken to Robben Island, a desolate, flat outcrop of rock surrounded by the turbulent, icy waters of the Atlantic Ocean, 7 miles off the coast of Cape Town. For the next 18 years, Robben Island would be his home. His cell was a small, damp, concrete room, measuring only 7 feet by 7 feet. When he lay down at night on his thin straw mat, his head and feet touched opposite walls. The prisoners were subjected to back-breaking hard labor, spending their days under a scorching sun, breaking stones in a lime quarry. The intense glare of the white lime permanently damaged Mandela's eyesight, tear ducts, and lungs. Under the strict prison regime, Mandela was classified as a Class D prisoner, the lowest rank. This meant he was allowed only 1 letter and 1 short visit from a family member every 6 months. The prison censors routinely cut out sections of letters or destroyed them entirely if they contained any political news or personal information deemed unacceptable. For decades, the apartheid government tried to erase his face, his voice, and his memory from the public consciousness, making it a serious crime to publish his photograph or quote his words. Yet, inside that tiny cell, Nelson Mandela did not diminish. He grew. He realized that the prison guards were also victims of the apartheid system, conditioned by fear and propaganda to hate Black people. Rather than treating them as enemies, Mandela treated his guards with profound dignity and respect. He taught himself Afrikaans, the language of his oppressors, and studied their history and culture. By speaking to them in their own tongue, he broke down their prejudices and transformed his prison into a diplomatic battleground. Robben Island became known among the inmates as the Mandela University. In the quarry, while pretending to work, the political prisoners would hold whispered debates about economic policy, philosophy, and the future structure of a democratic government. Mandela mentored younger prisoners, teaching them discipline, strategy, and the vital importance of unity. He taught them that anger was an emotion that clouded strategic judgment, and that to defeat your adversary, you had to maintain absolute control over your mind and your actions. As the calendar turned to the 1980s, the situation inside South Africa began to boil over. A new generation of youth rose up in the townships, launching massive protests and strikes. The international anti-apartheid movement reached a fever pitch. The slogan, "Free Nelson Mandela," became a global anthem. Mega concerts were held in London, consumer boycotts crippled South African exports, and major international banks began pulling their investments out of the country. The apartheid economy was collapsing, and the nation was slipping into an anarchic, bloody civil war. Recognizing that the status quo was unsustainable, the white government secretly initiated secret talks with Mandela while he was still a prisoner. They offered to release him on multiple occasions, but only if he agreed to renounce violence and accept the existence of the tribal homelands. Mandela flatly refused, sending a message to his people that stated, "What freedom am I being offered while the organization of the people remains banned? Only free men can negotiate. A prisoner cannot enter into contracts." The breakthrough finally came in late 1989 when a pragmatist named F.W. de Klerk became the state president. Realizing that the apartheid regime was doomed, de Klerk made a series of historic announcements. He unbanned the African National Congress and other liberation movements, suspended the death penalty, and ordered the immediate, unconditional release of Nelson Mandela. On February 11, 1990, the world stood still. Television cameras from every corner of the earth focused on the gates of Victor Verster prison. At the age of 71, after 27 years, 6 months, and 6 days of confinement, Nelson Mandela walked out into the sunlight as a free man. He held his head high, a radiant smile on his face, holding hands with his wife, Winnie Mandela. Thousands of people lined the streets, cheering and crying tears of joy. That very evening, he addressed a massive crowd of over 100,000 people from the balcony of the Cape Town City Hall. He did not call for revolution or revenge. Instead, he called for peace, discipline, and a committed focus on negotiations to build a non-racial democracy. The 4 years that followed his release were perhaps the most dangerous and fragile in South African history. The country was a powder keg. Right-wing white extremists threatened a military coup, while radical black factions clashed violently in the townships. Assassinations became a common tool used by those who wanted to destroy the peace process. The most critical moment came in April 1993, when a white extremist assassinated Chris Hani, a deeply loved and highly popular black leader. The country was on the absolute brink of an all-out racial civil war. With the white government frozen in fear, Mandela stepped into the leadership vacuum. He went on national television and delivered a calm, commanding address to the nation. He reminded the citizens that the assassin was a white immigrant, but the person who risked her life to call the police and catch the killer was a white South African woman. He pleaded with the people to stand together and not let those who worship violence destroy the future of their country. His moral authority single-handedly diffused the crisis. For their extraordinary resilience and leadership in guiding the country away from a bloodbath, Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk were jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in December 1993. On April 27, 1994, the ultimate victory was achieved. South Africa held its first ever fully democratic, multiracial elections. The world watched in profound amazement as millions of black, white, Indian, and mixed-race citizens stood together in long, peaceful lines that stretched for miles across the landscape, waiting to cast their ballots. For millions of people, it was the very first time they had ever voted in their lives. The African National Congress won a landslide victory, and on May 10, 1994, Nelson Mandela was inaugurated as the first black president of a free and democratic South Africa. His inauguration was attended by world leaders, monarchs, and dignitaries from every corner of the globe, alongside three of his former prison guards from Robben Island, whom he invited as his honored VIP guests. In his historic inaugural address, Mandela spoke words that healed a broken nation. He declared, "Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another and suffer the indignity of being the skunk of the world. Let freedom reign. The sun shall never set on so glorious a human achievement." As president, Mandela faced the colossal task of governing a deeply scarred country. The white minority was terrified of retaliation, while the black majority expected immediate economic transformation. Mandela chose the difficult path of national reconciliation. He championed the concept of the Rainbow Nation, an idea that celebrated the country's diverse cultures, languages, and heritages working together in harmony. One of his most legendary acts of reconciliation occurred during the 1995 Rugby World Cup, which was hosted by South Africa. Rugby had long been a sport reserved almost exclusively for the white minority, and the national team, the Springboks, was widely hated by the black majority as a painful symbol of apartheid oppression. Most black citizens routinely cheered for whichever team was playing against South Africa. Mandela saw an opportunity to change the narrative. He visited the Springboks team, encouraged them, and taught them the lyrics of the new national anthem. When South Africa miraculously won the tournament by defeating New Zealand in the final match, Mandela walked out onto the field in front of a predominantly white crowd of 65,000 roaring fans. He was wearing the green and gold Springbok jersey, bearing the number of the team's captain, Francois Pienaar. The crowd, initially stunned, began to chant his name, Mandela, Mandela, over and over again. In that singular, electric moment, the racial divide narrowed significantly, and the nation celebrated as one people. It was a masterclass in political symbolism and empathy. To address the horrific crimes committed during the apartheid era without causing further division, Mandela's government established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, chaired by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. The commission offered a radical alternative to the traditional trials seen after World War II. Instead of seeking retribution, it allowed perpetrators of political violence to step forward and confess their crimes in public. If they told the absolute truth, they were granted amnesty. This allowed the families of victims to finally learn the truth about what happened to their loved ones, prioritizing psychological healing, transparency, and national unity over retributive justice. In 1999, after serving just a single 5-year term as president, Nelson Mandela made another extraordinary choice. In a continent where many revolutionary leaders held on to political power for life through corruption and force, Mandela willingly chose to step down, refusing to run for a second term. He established a crucial democratic precedent for peaceful political succession, passing the presidency to his deputy, Thabo Mbeki. Even in retirement, Mandela remained a tireless global advocate for human rights, peace, and public health. He established the Nelson Mandela Foundation and became a vocal campaigner in the fight against HIV and AIDS, a crisis that was ravaging sub-Saharan Africa. He courageously spoke out against the social stigma surrounding the disease, publicly announcing that his own son had passed away from AIDS-related complications. On December 5, 2013, at the age of 95, Nelson Mandela drew his final breath at his home in Johannesburg, surrounded by his loving family. The news of his passing was met with a massive wave of global grief, but also a profound celebration of a life extraordinarily well lived. His memorial service was attended by nearly 100 current and former heads of state, reflecting the universal respect he commanded across political and ideological divides. Nelson Mandela's enduring legacy is a powerful testament to the fact that courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. He proved to a skeptical world that humanity's capacity for forgiveness, empathy, and unity is far stronger than its capacity for hatred and division. His life remains an eternal guiding light for anyone fighting against injustice, demonstrating that with an unbreakable will, an unyielding moral compass, and a compassionate heart, it is entirely possible to reshape the world and usher in the dawn of true freedom.